My name is Carlos and I've been collecting stories for over 20 years now. Stories about real people, real pain, real triumph. But this one hit differently. When Sarah first told me what happened at that Christmas dinner, I had to sit down. Sometimes the people we think we know turn out to be complete strangers wearing familiar faces. It was December 23rd when Sarah first sensed something was wrong. The air in her home smelled like cinnamon and pine, that perfect blend of holiday warmth that should have made everything feel safe. She'd spent 3 days preparing for this dinner, her hands raw from kneading dough, her kitchen filled with the aroma of roasting turkey and freshly baked rolls. The Christmas tree lights twinkled in the corner of the living room, casting soft shadows on the cream-colored walls she'd painted herself just months before. Sarah had married David 8 months earlier, and this was their first Christmas as a married couple hosting his family. She wanted everything to be perfect. She needed them to see her not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged, someone who loved their son with every fiber of her being. The doorbell rang at 6 o'clock sharp. Sarah smoothed down her emerald green dress, took a deep breath that tasted like anxiety and hope, and opened the door with her warmest smile. David's mother, Patricia, stepped in first, her eyes scanning the entryway with the precision of a health inspector. Behind her came David's father, Robert, and his younger sister, Amanda, with her husband, Jake. "Merry Christmas," Sarah said, her voice bright and welcoming. The cold December air rushed in behind them, carrying the scent of snow and expensive perfume. Patricia's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Yes, Merry Christmas," she said, handing Sarah her coat without making eye contact. The fabric was cashmere, heavy and cold in Sarah's hands. The evening started quietly enough. Everyone gathered in the living room where Sarah had set out appetizers, cheese and crackers arranged on her grandmother's antique serving platter, the only thing she had left from her family. The sound of ice clinking in glasses mixed with polite conversation about traffic and weather. But Sarah noticed the glances. Oh God, she noticed every single one of them. Patricia whispered something to Robert, her hand covering her mouth like a teenage girl sharing gossip. Amanda laughed, that high-pitched sound that made Sarah's stomach clench. David, sweet David, seemed oblivious, talking enthusiastically about his new promotion at work. "Dinner's ready," Sarah announced, trying to ignore the knot forming in her chest. The dining room table looked like something from a magazine. Candles flickered between arrangements of holly and red berries. The china gleamed under the chandelier light. Everything was perfect. Everything except the atmosphere. They took their seats and Sarah began serving the food she'd worked so hard to prepare. The turkey was golden brown, the mashed potatoes fluffy and steaming, the green beans sautéed with garlic and almonds, just the way David had told her his family liked them. "This looks adequate," Patricia said, her fork hovering over her plate. "Adequate." The word hung in the air like smoke. Sarah forced another smile and sat down beside David, who squeezed her hand under the table. That small gesture gave her strength, reminded her that she wasn't alone. The sound of silverware against china filled the silence, punctuated by occasional comments about the weather, about Amanda's new car, about anything except the elephant in the room. Then Sarah got up to refill the water pitcher. As she walked toward the kitchen, she heard it. Patricia's voice, low and sharp, cutting through the warm air like a knife through butter. "She doesn't belong here." Sarah froze. The water pitcher trembled in her hands and for a moment she thought she'd imagined it. But then Robert's voice followed, equally quiet but unmistakable. "I know, dear. But David seems happy." "Happy?" Amanda chimed in. "He could have done so much better. Someone from our circle, someone who understands our world." My heart sank. Oh my God, I cannot believe this is happening. The smell of the Christmas dinner that had filled her with pride moments before now made her nauseated. The twinkling lights that had seemed magical now felt mocking. David started to say something, his voice rising with anger, but Sarah walked back into the dining room before he could finish. She wasn't shaking anymore. Something had shifted inside her like a lock clicking open. She set the water pitcher down on the table with deliberate care, the sound of glass meeting would echoing in the suddenly silent room. Patricia's face had gone pale. Robert coughed. Amanda suddenly became very interested in her green beans. Sarah pulled out her chair and sat down, folding her hands on the table. The candlelight danced across her face and when she spoke, her voice was calm. Too calm. "I think," she said slowly, "there's something you all should know." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, could feel David's confused gaze on her face, could sense Patricia's barely concealed disdain turning into something else. Fear maybe. Or was it curiosity? "Sarah?" David's voice was gentle, concerned. He reached for her hand, but she pulled away softly. This was something she needed to do alone. When I met David, Sarah began, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her, I didn't tell him everything about my background. Not because I was ashamed, but because I wanted him to love me for who I am, not for what I have. She paused, letting the words sink in. The smell of turkey was still strong in the air, mixing now with the scent of Patricia's expensive perfume and something else, the sharp tang of nervous sweat. Robert cleared his throat. Sarah, there's no need to. Oh, but there is, Sarah interrupted, her eyes meeting his directly. You see, you've all made assumptions about me from the day we met. I could see it in your eyes, in the way you questioned whether I was suitable for your son. Her fingers traced the edge of her grandmother's serving platter, the one they'd eaten appetizers from just an hour ago. Amanda shifted uncomfortably in her chair, the leather creaking beneath her. Jake, her husband, stared at his plate like it held the secrets of the universe. You asked me once, Patricia, what my parents did for a living. Sarah's voice remained calm, almost conversational. I told you my father passed away when I was young and my mother worked hard to raise me. Both true. What I didn't mention was that my father was Henry Morrison. The name hung in the air like a ghost. Patricia's fork clattered against her plate. Robert's face went from pink to white in seconds. Henry Morrison? Robert whispered. The real estate developer Henry Morrison? Sarah nodded slowly. The very same. The man who built half of this city's commercial district. The man who owned Morrison and Associates, one of the largest property development companies on the East Coast. She took a sip of water, her hand perfectly steady now. My mother, Catherine Morrison, inherited everything when he died. She was his partner in business and in life, though most people only saw her as the wife. The distant sound of carolers singing on the street drifted through the windows, a surreal soundtrack to the revelation unfolding at the dinner table. Somewhere a dog barked, and the heating system hummed softly, filling the spaces between words. David was staring at her with wide eyes. Sarah, why didn't you? Because I wanted you to love me, not my bank account, she said softly, turning to face her husband. I wanted to know that I could build a life with someone who saw me, not dollar signs. Her eyes glistened, but her voice never wavered. And you did. You loved me when I was just Sarah, the girl who worked at the bookstore, who made you laugh, who burned toast but made excellent pasta. She turned back to Patricia, whose composed mask had completely crumbled. My mother passed away 2 years ago. She left me everything. The company, the properties, the investments. Everything my father built and everything she grew it into. Amanda found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a squeak. But you work at a bookstore. I own the bookstore, Sarah corrected gently. Among other things. I work there because I love books, because I love the smell of old paper and the sound of pages turning, because it keeps me grounded and reminds me that wealth isn't what defines us. She stood up, walking slowly around the table. Her footsteps were soft against the hardwood floor David thought he'd saved up to afford. Oh my God, the realization was hitting them one by one like dominoes falling. This house, Sarah continued, gesturing around the beautifully decorated dining room, the one you're sitting in right now, the one you assumed David bought with his hard-earned salary. She paused at the window, looking out at the snow beginning to fall, coating the manicured lawn in white. I bought it. With my money. As a wedding gift to us. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth. Robert set down his wine glass with shaking fingers. The furniture, the renovations, even David's new car, the one you complimented Robert saying your son had finally made something of himself, I paid for it all. Sarah's voice finally carried an edge now, sharp as broken glass. Not because David couldn't provide. He's an incredible man with a successful career. But because I wanted to contribute, because I wanted us to start our marriage in a home filled with love and possibility. The Christmas tree lights blinked rhythmically in the living room, red and green and gold, indifferent to the drama unfolding just feet away. David stood up, moving toward Sarah. Sweetheart, I had no idea you. I know, she said, touching his face gently. And that's exactly why I love you. You never asked, never assumed, never treated me differently. Then she turned back to his family, her expression hardening. Unlike some people who judged a book by its cover and found it wanting. The scent of apple pie wafted from the kitchen, the timer beeping softly, reminding them that dessert was ready. But nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows, and somewhere in the distance, church bells rang out Christmas Eve's approach. The apple pie timer kept beeping, insistent and shrill, but Sarah made no move to silence it. Let it beep. Let the discomfort grow. She'd spent months being uncomfortable in the presence of these people who smiled to her face while whispering behind her back. Patricia finally found her voice, though it trembled like autumn leaves in wind. Sarah, Oh, we didn't mean, you have to understand we were only concerned for David's well-being. Concerned? Sarah's laugh was bitter, cutting through the warm air like a winter wind through thin curtains. Is that what you call it when you organize family dinners and conveniently forget to invite me? When you talk about David's future, as if I'm some temporary inconvenience? When you introduce him to your friends' daughters at every opportunity? David's head snapped toward his mother. You did what? The smell of burning pie crust began to mix with the other scents in the house. Sarah walked calmly to the kitchen, turned off the timer and the oven, and returned with the slightly overdone dessert. She set it on the table with deliberate care, right in the center of all that expensive china and crystal. Jennifer Hartley, Sarah said conversationally, cutting into the pie with practiced precision. Lawyer. You introduced her to David at your country club in September. Then there was Michelle something, was it Patterson? The surgeon's daughter. That was October. She served a slice of pie onto Patricia's plate, the steam rising between them like a curtain. And just last month at your annual charity gala, that investment banker whose name I didn't catch because David refused to speak to her beyond basic pleasantries. Amanda's face had gone red. We were just networking. David's career could benefit from. From what? Sarah interrupted, her voice sharp now. From abandoning his wife? From pretending I don't exist? She sat down, folding her hands on the table. The candlelight made shadows dance across her face, and in that moment she looked like someone who'd been pushed too far and finally decided to push back. Tell me, Amanda, how would you feel if Jake's family treated you like you were invisible? If they whispered about you not belonging? Jake spoke for the first time that evening, his voice quiet but firm. They'd have hell to pay. He looked at Amanda with something that might have been disappointment. And you know it. The sound of distant traffic hummed outside, normal life continuing while this family imploded over Christmas dinner. Somewhere in the neighborhood, children laughed, probably playing with new toys, probably thinking their families were normal and happy. Robert cleared his throat, attempting to regain some authority. Now, Sarah, let's not be dramatic. We're family. Families have disagreements, but we work through them. Family, Sarah repeated, the word tasting like ashes in her mouth. You've never treated me like family, Robert. You've treated me like an interloper, someone who tricked your son into marriage, someone who needed to be tolerated but never accepted. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages. Should I read the text messages between Patricia and Amanda? The ones discussing how to help David see reason? Or maybe the email exchange about finding him a more suitable match? Patricia's face drained of all color. You hacked our messages? David's phone is on our family plan, Sarah explained calmly. The one I pay for. When messages come through about my own husband, about plans to break up my marriage, they get flagged by our security system. Yes, security system. The one I had installed because I've learned that wealthy women need to protect themselves. She set the phone down on the table. I didn't want to believe it at first. I told myself I was being paranoid, that surely my husband's family wouldn't actively plot against me. David stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor with a sound like a scream. Mom, Dad, is this true? Have you been trying to sabotage my marriage? The silence that followed was deafening. Patricia's hands shook as she reached for her wine glass, and the crystal trembled against her lips. Robert couldn't meet his son's eyes. Amanda stared at her lap like a child caught stealing cookies. We thought, Patricia began, but David cut her off. You thought what? That you knew better than me who I should love? That you had the right to interfere in my life? His voice cracked with emotion, and Sarah could see the boy he must have been, trying to please parents who were never quite satisfied. Sarah is my wife. I chose her. I love her. And you've been, oh my God, you've been undermining us this whole time? The aroma of coffee from earlier had gone stale, mixing with the scent of cold gravy and disappointment. The Christmas tree in the corner seemed to lose some of its magic, the lights less bright somehow, the ornaments less cheerful. We only wanted what's best for you, Patricia said, tears forming in her eyes. But they looked less like tears of remorse and more like tears of someone caught in a lie they can't escape. Sarah stood again, walking to the ornate sideboard where she'd placed her purse earlier. She pulled out a manila folder, thick with documents, and set it on the table next to the half-eaten pie. The sound of paper hitting wood was surprisingly loud in the tense silence. Inside this folder, she said quietly, are the deeds to 3 properties. This house where we're sitting right now. The beach house in Cape May that you've been using for your summer vacations, Robert. And the condo in Manhattan that Amanda lives in rent-free. The words fell like bombs, and Sarah watched as comprehension dawned on each face around the table. I own them all. Amanda's face went from red to white in an instant. What? No, that's impossible. Dad bought me that condo. He said. He said a lot of things apparently, Sarah interrupted, her voice steady as steel. But the truth is your father's investments took a hit 3 years ago. Bad market decisions, some risky ventures that didn't pan out. He was on the verge of losing everything. Robert stood up so fast his chair toppled backward, hitting the floor with a crash that made everyone jump. Sarah, you have no right to. I have every right, she cut him off, her voice rising for the first time that evening. Because when your son came to me 6 months ago, worried sick because his father had asked to borrow money for a family emergency, I didn't hesitate. I wrote the check. $200,000, Robert. Do you remember? The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked steadily, marking seconds that felt like hours. Outside, the snow fell heavier now, coating everything in white silence. David turned to his father, his expression a mixture of shock and betrayal. You told me you'd handled it. You said everything was fine, that you'd secured a loan from the bank. I did handle it, Robert stammered, his authoritative demeanor crumbling like dried leaves. The money from Sarah, it saved us. But I was going to pay her back, I swear. With what? Sarah asked, opening the folder and pulling out bank statements. The paper rustled in the quiet room, a whisper of truth that couldn't be ignored. You're 3 months behind on the loan for your car. Patricia's credit cards are maxed out. The country club membership you're so proud of? I've been paying those dues through a shell company so David wouldn't find out and worry. Oh my God, I cannot believe this is happening. Patricia's tears were flowing freely now, black mascara streaking down her carefully made-up face. But Sarah felt no satisfaction in this, only a deep, profound sadness that it had come to this. The beach house you vacation in every summer, Sarah continued, her voice softer now but no less firm, was about to be foreclosed on. I bought it outright. Same with Amanda's condo. I've been covering the HOA fees, the property taxes, everything. Not because I wanted to hold it over anyone's head, but because I loved David, and I didn't want him to see his family suffer. The smell of melted wax from the burning candles mixed with something acrid, fear, perhaps, or shame. Amanda was crying now too, her hands covering her face. Jake sat beside her, looking like he'd been punched in the stomach. You knew? Amanda whispered to her husband. Did you know about any of this? Jake shook his head slowly. I knew your family had money troubles. Your dad mentioned it once. But I had no idea Sarah was. He looked at Sarah with something like awe and horror mixed together. I had no idea. David sank back into his chair, his face buried in his hands. Sarah wanted to go to him, to comfort him, but this moment needed to happen. These truths needed to be spoken, to be witnessed, to be acknowledged. So let me make sure I understand this correctly, David said finally, his voice muffled by his hands. My wife, who you've been treating like trash for 8 months, who you've called unsuitable, and not one of us, has been secretly supporting my entire family financially? David, please, Patricia began, reaching across the table toward her son. We didn't know. We had no idea that she had. Money? Sarah supplied. Power? The means to help you or destroy you? She pulled out more documents from the folder. Here are the property deeds. Here are the loan agreements. Here are the receipts for every country club payment, every property tax bill, every expense I've covered for the last 6 months. She spread them across the table like a dealer laying out cards. I kept meticulous records. Not because I planned to use them as weapons, but because my mother taught me that in business, you document everything. The sound of breaking glass made everyone jump. Patricia had knocked over her wine glass, red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. Nobody moved to clean it up. They all just stared at the growing stain, watching it seep toward the documents Sarah had laid out. I'm not telling you this to humiliate you, Sarah said, her voice breaking just slightly. God, I wish I didn't have to say any of this. But you left me no choice. You couldn't just accept me, couldn't just let me love your son and be happy. You had to whisper. You had to scheme. You had to make me feel like I was nothing. She picked up one of the property deeds, the one for the house they were sitting in. She doesn't belong here, you said. But this is my house. These are my walls. This is my table you're sitting at, eating food I prepared in a home I created. The heating system kicked on with a low hum, pushing warm air through the vents. But nobody felt warm. The cold had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the ice that had formed around hearts that should have known better. "So here's what's going to happen," Sarah said, her voice firm again. "You're going to make a choice. All of you. Right now." David looked up at his wife, his eyes red. Amanda stopped crying, waiting. Robert and Patricia froze, holding their breath. "You can accept me as part of this family, truly accept me with all the respect and love that entails. Or," Sarah paused, letting the weight of the alternative hang in the air. "Or I exercise my rights as the property owner. All the properties. And you figure out your own financial situations without me. This isn't just about money. This changes everything." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the grandfather clock seemed to hold its breath. Snow continued to fall outside, covering the world in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new, even when nothing felt clean anymore. Patricia was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sarah, we've been terrible to you." The words came out broken, punctuated by small sobs that shook her shoulders. "You're right. About everything. We judged you without knowing you. We assumed things that weren't true. We were cruel." Robert's hands trembled as he reached for the documents on the table, not to take them but simply to touch them, as if confirming they were real. "I was ashamed," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. "Ashamed that I'd failed, that I couldn't provide for my family the way I used to. And when David brought you home, so confident and independent, I thought—" He paused, swallowing hard. "I thought you'd look down on us. So I looked down on you first." The smell of cold coffee and burnt pie crust hung in the air, mixing with the pine scent from the Christmas tree and the lingering aroma of dinner that had gone cold on their plates. Amanda wiped her eyes with her napkin, the expensive linen leaving black streaks of mascara across the white fabric. "I was jealous," Amanda admitted, her voice small. "You seemed so together, so sure of yourself. And David looked at you like you hung the moon. I'd never seen him that happy, and instead of being glad for him, I resented you for it." She looked at Jake, who squeezed her hand. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I've been awful." David stood up and walked to Sarah, taking both her hands in his. "Why didn't you tell me? Any of it? About your family, about the money, about what you'd done for my parents?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears for the first time that evening. "Because I wanted you to love me for me. Not for what I could provide. And your family? I kept hoping they'd come around, that they'd see past their assumptions and just accept me." A single tear rolled down her cheek. "But they never did. And tonight, when I heard those words, 'She doesn't belong here,' something in me just broke." David pulled her into his arms, and she let herself lean against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I should have seen it. I should have protected you better." "You did protect me," Sarah said softly. "You loved me. You chose me every day. That's what kept me going." She pulled back to look at him. "But I needed them to know. I needed them to understand what they'd been doing, what it cost." The sound of a chair scraping made them both turn. Patricia had stood up, her face blotchy and red from crying, but her expression was determined. She walked around the table to where Sarah stood and did something completely unexpected. She knelt down. "Oh my God," Amanda breathed. Patricia looked up at Sarah, her proud facade completely shattered. "I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I've been cruel and small-minded and everything a mother-in-law shouldn't be." Her voice cracked. "But I'm asking anyway. Please, give me a chance to be better. To be the family you deserve." Robert stood as well, moving to join his wife. He didn't kneel, but he extended his hand to Sarah. "Everything Patricia said goes for me too. I let my pride and my fear turn me into someone I'm not proud of. Someone my son shouldn't be proud of." He glanced at David, then back to Sarah. "You saved us and we repaid you with contempt. That's unforgivable. But if you're willing, I'd like to try to earn your forgiveness anyway." The distant sound of church bells rang out, marking midnight. Christmas Day had arrived, bringing with it the possibility of redemption or the finality of broken bonds. Sarah looked at each face around the table. David's hopeful expression, Patricia's tear-stained desperation, Robert's humbled shame, Amanda's genuine remorse. "Get up, Patricia," Sarah said quietly. "Please." Patricia rose slowly and Sarah took a deep breath. "I don't know if I can forget what happened. The whispers, the exclusion, the schemes. That hurt goes deep and it doesn't just disappear because we want it to." She looked around at all of them. "But I believe people can change. I believe families can heal. And I believe that sometimes the hardest things we do are the things that matter most." She picked up the property deeds from the table. These are yours. They always were. I didn't buy them to control you or manipulate you. I bought them because David loves you and I love David. Family is supposed to take care of each other even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Amanda stood up, walking over to Sarah with hesitant steps. Can I hug you?" she asked, her voice small. Sarah nodded, and Amanda wrapped her arms around her sister-in-law, whispering, "I'm sorry," over and over like a prayer. Soon Patricia joined, then Robert and finally David, until Sarah was surrounded by the family that had rejected her, now holding her like they might never let go. The Christmas tree lights blinked steadily, red and green and gold, witnessing this moment of truth and reconciliation. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, and the world looked pristine and new. "This doesn't fix everything," Sarah said into the group embrace. "Trust takes time to rebuild. But if you're willing to put in the work, if you're willing to see me as I really am and accept me for who that is, then I'm willing to try." "We will," Patricia promised. "We'll do better. We'll be better." They stood there for a long moment, this fractured family beginning to knit itself back together, one awkward hug at a time. The dinner table was a mess, the food cold, the wine spilled. But somehow it didn't matter. What mattered was this moment, this choice to move forward rather than stay stuck in the pain of the past. Later, after they'd cleaned up together and reheated the food and even managed some genuine laughter, Sarah and David stood on their front porch watching his family drive away. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, covered in fresh snow that sparkled under the streetlights. "That was the most intense Christmas dinner in history," David said, wrapping his arm around Sarah's shoulders. She laughed, a real laugh that felt like relief. "I'm sorry I kept so much from you. About my family, about the money, about what your parents had been doing." "I understand why you did," David said. "And honestly, watching you stand up for yourself, for us, watching you lay down the law like that, I've never been more proud to call you my wife." He kissed her temple. "Or more intimidated." Sarah smiled. "Good. A little healthy fear keeps a marriage interesting." They stood there in comfortable silence, watching the snow glisten and the stars peek through clearing clouds. Somewhere in the distance, someone was playing Christmas music, the notes drifting through the cold air like promises of hope. "Do you think they meant it?" David asked. "About changing?" "I think they want to," Sarah said carefully. "Whether they succeed is up to them. But I meant what I said, I'm willing to give them the chance. For you. For us. For the possibility that broken things can be mended." She thought about her mother, about the lessons she'd learned growing up about strength and grace, about knowing your worth and standing firm in it. "My mom used to say that the measure of a person isn't in how they treat you when everything is perfect. It's in what they do when they've messed up, when they have to choose between their pride and their relationships." "Your mom sounds like she was wise," David said. "She was." Sarah felt the familiar ache of loss but also gratitude. "And she'd have liked tonight. Not the cruelty part but the standing up for myself part. She always said I was too soft, too willing to accept less than I deserved to avoid conflict." "I don't think anyone could call you soft after tonight," David laughed. "You were magnificent. Terrifying but magnificent." They went back inside, locking the door behind them, shutting out the cold and the past and all the hurt that had come before. Tomorrow they'd start fresh, building the family they both wanted, one based on honesty and respect and genuine love. But tonight, Christmas morning, technically, they had each other and a house full of memories, both painful and hopeful, and the knowledge that sometimes you have to break things completely before you can rebuild them stronger. This story shows us that respect isn't given based on bank accounts or social status. It's earned through character and action. Sometimes the people who should love us most are the ones who hurt us deepest, but it's through standing up for ourselves that we discover our true strength. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our emotional stories. Leave a comment below. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who underestimated you? Remember always, you are stronger than you imagine, and you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter who's doing the judging. And you, what do you value more? The appearance of family harmony or the reality of honest relationships, even when the truth is painful?